G'day mates, Quarterblast here, and welcome back to another bloody review of Dave. And no, not Dave your uncle, but Dave, a 1993 romantic political comedy, directed by Canadian film director Ivan Reitman, and written by Gary Ross, who, fun fact, apparently played a part in many campaigns for the Democrats in his younger life, including for Bill Clinton, if Wikipedia is to be believed.
This fact will be important later in the video. Make sure to remember it in your mind.
So, what is this movie about? Well, it's based on a classic switcheroo between the President of the United States of America and your everyday Joe. Or I guess in this context, Dave! In the movie, the current president is Bill Mitchell, a womanizing, self-absorbed politician who barely sees his wife and doesn't care about the homeless. Yes, I know, quite hard to believe. This is in stark contrast to our main character, Dave Kovic, who works at a temporary employment agency and is obnoxiously nice to everybody. Everybody works on Monday! He's so nice he constantly guilt trips his business friend into hiring workers he doesn't even need, just so their families can have food to eat. I mean, come on man, that's just lame. He also has the distinction of looking very similar to the president's likeness, and is hired by the government to stand in his place, while the real president buggers off to bugger off his secretary. Ha! Relatable. But while they're getting it down on the dance floor, the president suffers a severe heart attack, and is put into a coma. Ha! Relatable. Now, instead of handing over the presidency to the vice president, like they're supposed to, two government workers concoct a plan to use Dave as a stand-in for the president until they can get rid of the vice and take the position for themselves. As such, Dave is taken into the White House and pretends to be the president until their plan is completed.
She hates me. Yes.
This is the general plot of the movie, sprinkling in some romantic tension, political allegations, and budget planning. Now I know what you might be thinking. Politics? What is this, the Phantom Menace? Don't you know that politics are boring, you red-blooded cell man? How can you possibly call the title of this video whimsical? Well, I think the movie does a wonderful job of presenting the whimsy of the position of the presidency, in a sort of childlike or fairy tale sense. You know, like the idea that you could sit down at the Oval Office and get rid of all homelessness or unemployment with the flick of a wrist, or the fun of being the most important person in the country. He gets to throw baseballs, kiss babies, and have a 100% chance of everyone laughing at your jokes. Ha! Now sure, that's not the reality of being president. Obviously the job is immensely stressful. I mean, all you gotta do is look at how presidents age before and after they take office. And look, I've read some reviews online about how this movie is too unrealistic, and I dare say, too whimsical. But let's remember, these same people probably want to ban snow days, pizza parties at work, and the idea of happiness. But I'll grant them this. If this was a more serious movie, which took everything at face value, and showed a complete disregard for how the government works, out of an ignorance for the story and setting, I can see how that would be annoying. However, I believe Dave shows a great understanding for the inner workings of the government, especially with all the subtle political referencing and commentary other reviewers swear exists. I'm not American. And let's not forget that the movie was written by Gary Ross, which if you'll remember from the start of the video, is clearly quite well informed about how the government and political landscape thinks, which you can surmise just by skimming through his Wikipedia page, and of course, watching the movie. What this tells me is that if he really wanted to, he could have brought Dave down into the realms of reality. But he made a conscious decision to keep the movie and the character of Dave whimsical and fairy tale-like, because it was the best way to tell this story without making it boring or bogging down the pace of the movie for the sake of realism. I think the rule this movie works under is, if you don't talk about how unrealistic we're being, I won't talk about it. Okay, buddy? And I think some people ignore the fact that everyone but Dave acts reasonably realistically how you would expect, but it's Dave's influence on the plot and the world that quote-unquote changes the script. And it's this contrast between the characters that's the source of the comedy. It's why watching one of the conspirators stare in angered disbelief at losing to Dave is so funny, because he's playing the game under real life logic instead of the movies. It's similar to why a character like Forrest Gump works. Gump's optimism and wacky successes contrast perfectly with the real life setting of the movie, and you can't help but be invested in the guy, because he's just so endearing. And I look at Dave the exact same way. I think Kevin Kline plays the whimsical everyman near perfectly and is the true heart of the movie. I described at the beginning of the review about how you instantly know that Dave is an insufferably nice guy. And though I was obviously exaggerating, this instant distinction to the audience was done quite purposely to contrast with the president's personality. In only the first 5 minutes, you instantly know from the little things that this guy's nice and this guy's an asshole. He flies a helicopter, he rides a bicycle. His tone is low and oppressive, his is light and uplifting. He cares about people, he aggressively chucks dog leads. The pacing is quick and efficient. The movie's like, we get it, he's nice, he rides a bike. Let's get a move on, people, we have a president to kill here. In fact, I think that's the best way to describe the pacing of this movie in general. Quick, but efficient. That's what she said. Oh no. But it's not just the fact that Dave is such a nice guy that makes him work as a character, but it's the little bits of character acting that make him so relatable and endearing to watch, especially at the beginning of the movie when he's enjoying all his new powers. Like his stop starting with the guards as he's walking down the halls, how he's constantly stealing small bits of memorabilia throughout the movie, and his awkward composure, which perfectly characterizes fish out of water persona. I think my favorite scene from the movie that categorizes this is during his first mission doubling as the president, as he walks down the red carpet and slowly builds up his confidence, the music slowly building up with him as he gets more and more excited, before climatically shouting, "God bless you and God bless America!" And then the music cheekily swells as he's hurriedly chucked into the car. Now that's what I call, relatable. On the topic of music, well, if you didn't think this movie was whimsical before, you should listen to the soundtrack. It plays as an impeccable wingman to every action on camera, with classic orchestral rhymes which move perfectly with the actors, and the more subtle pieces which feel so reminiscent. Even to a youngster like me. What I also appreciate about the sound design in the movie is the fact that it's not afraid to be quiet. This helps to bring the audience back to reality. Oh, there goes gravity! And allows time for the music to build itself up in a scene or to subtly support a character's action. I mean, if every scene in action was paraded with constant whimsical music and sound, it would probably turn from emotionally uplifting to annoying quite quickly. Which is why the movie is so careful and selective for when or what it pulls out the soundtrack for. Which is usually to build up Dave or to be very sad. Aww. Alright then, let's do a classic rundown of the characters, shall we? As I said before, this movie is quick and concise, and the characters are no different. There are only about 7 characters in total that hold relevancy to the plot and appear regularly throughout the movie. So let's have a look at them. Let's start off with the love interest of this romantic comedy, the second lady, Ellen Mitchell, played by Alien's Sigourney Weaver. Now the movie could have gone down a really creepy path with this character, in regard to her and Dave's relationship, especially with him masquerading as her dying husband. But thankfully, despite the movie's unthreatening to, they don't go down this path, and in fact despite some minor hints here or there, the two of them don't particularly get romantically involved in the movie proper, despite, you know, supposedly being a romance. That's not to say there isn't any cute or memorable scenes between the two of them, because there definitely is. Weaver does a great job of slowly revealing this character to the audience, and taking us down her many different layers. In the first half or so of the movie, her and Dave remain isolated from each other, and all we see is the disdain for her womanizing husband. But later on in the movie, she opens up with Dave and the audience about her wants and aspirations, and it's her influence that pushes Dave to be a better president as the story continues. I personally really like Ellen's snark and wit throughout the movie. She has some pretty great lines in that regard, and like others in the audience, I sympathize with her marriage troubles with the president. Moving on to the supporting cast is our Secret Service detail Dwayne Stevenson, played by Pulp Fiction's Ving Rhames. Stevenson is sort of a nothing character to me. Like, he's always somewhere on screen, and he does serve as a good person for Dave to talk to early on in the movie, until the First Lady comes in. But his character arc about taking a bullet for the president feels sort of underwhelming. He basically has a conversation where him and Dave talk about his training as a Secret Service member, and how he has to take a bullet for the president. However, when Dave asks him if he would take a bullet for him, even though he knows he's not the real president, he doesn't give an answer. This sort of implies that later on in the movie that the guard will be tested on his loyalty to Dave in some sort of "Get down, Mr. President" type way. This is sort of further implied by the talk of assassination by one of the conspirators midway through the movie. But instead of this test of loyalty, Stevenson just sort of tells Dave at the end of the movie, "Oh yeah, for sure, I would have taken a bullet for you, man." Of course. Which is sweet and all, but sort of feels pointless, especially since it was never really implied Stevenson didn't like Dave. It feels even more pointless when you realize this is his only character arc in the movie. Now for our two conspirators, Bob Alexander and Alan Reed, played by Dracula's Frank Langella and Transformers' Kevin Dunn respectively. Now in reality, Bob is the real antagonist of the story, trying to steal away the presidency for himself or forcing Alan to follow his lead in his crazy plot for power. As an antagonist, Langella does a great job of displaying his frustrations and internal thoughts. I mean, look at any scene he's in with Dave and you could have sworn he was only hired for those intense stares. Whoa! One of the most comedic parts of the movie is watching Bob's schemes backfire in his face, and it's super rewarding watching our everyman Dave outsmart and outmaneuver his former puppet master. Alan in the story serves to balance Bob's ambitions, and as a person for Bob to vent to about his frustrations with Dave. Later on in the movie, Alan basically switches sides and tries to refrain Bob from killing Dave once he begins to clip his strings. Despite all this, I feel like Alan gets away with everything a little bit too scot-free. Like, sure, he wasn't as power-hungry as Bob, but he was complacent in the conspiracy to replace the president. And I have a sneaking suspicion he was a lot more involved in those previous government scandals than he lets on. Though that's just my headcanon. Again, I messed up that joke. Finally, we get to the most minor of characters, the president's secretary, played by The Truman Show's Laura Linney. Now, if you remember from the plot synopsis, she was the last person the president cheated on before his heart attack on the dance floor. You may also have noticed that she mysteriously doesn't do anything of significance throughout the rest of the movie, despite the fact that she continues working at the office. Personally, I think there must have been some cut content around her character, because it seems to me there should have been a scene where she figures out Dave's lying, or comes forward about her allegations with Bob later on in the movie. But she doesn't seem to do anything. Perhaps this last bit never happened because of a certain president taking office? I mean, this movie was released in 1993, and the guy's name is Bill. But I'm not sure how prevalent the allegations were back then when this movie was released. In any event, I think this movie missed some potential here. For my last bit of criticism, I'm going to be talking about the ending, so spoilers are high for this part. At the end of the movie, Dave fires Bob, and Dave can finally become the president he wants to be. After Bob was fired, however, he goes to the press with a scandal that implicates the president and his administration around some election fraud, which Dave discovers the real president was actually a part of. Seeing as it's getting in the way of bringing the change Dave wants to make, he decides it's time for him to move on and hand over the presidency to the vice, but not until he can give one final "up yours" to Bob. During a joint meeting at the houses, Dave admits to the president's involvement in the scandal, but in turn brings forth all the documentation around the scandal, which proved that Bob also knew and was involved in the scandal, basically destroying Bob's entire credibility and, political career. Dave goes on to talk about his belief in democracy and doing what's right for the people, before faking a heart attack. At the hospital, he switches places with the real COVID president, and simply walks back home to his normal life. The film ends with him running for a small government job, and Ellen finding him and making out with him, as you do, ending the movie. Now, I like most of this ending, but there's some little things here or there that I think they could have done better. For starters, I really like the fact that they don't do the whole annoying liar of ill scene, where Dave admits to the fact that he's not the real president and goes, "Oh, I'm really sorry for deceiving you guys." And I like how instead he realizes the advantages of not being personally connected to the scandal, and instead goes all out with revealing all the corruption of the administration, which is the perfect FU to Bob and his legacy. I do wish, however, that instead of the really cheesy ending we got, where Dave gets the girl and everything's perfect, we instead got a more bittersweet ending, with Dave simply just walking home, as Ellen watches on sadly to herself, and the news coverage talks about all the good Dave did as president, and how the world will never know that this random person, this average Joe, changed the world. I don't know, I think that would have been a lot more artful and memorable than this cheesy-ass ending we got. I mean, especially with the security guard being there at the end, that literally makes no sense. How could he have possibly been... So, Dave. It's pretty whimsical, am I right? I'm not sure about how many people these days have seen this movie, but I highly recommend it. It's just such a feel-good time. I just hope I've done a good enough job of convincing you that this is a whimsical movie, and that it's not just me who thinks that. But anyway, I'm Quarterblast here, signing off. Thanks for watching, I'll catch you all in the next video. Adios.